Jake Riley had always been good at talking his way out of trouble. Back on Earth, he could sell ice to people living in Antarctica. But right now, lying flat on his back in some weird alien hospital, he wasn't feeling very smooth at all. The spaceship crash had been brutal. 1 minute he was sitting in economy class, heading to a mining colony for what he thought would be easy pickings. And the next minute alarms were blaring and the ship was spinning toward an unknown planet. Most passengers didn't make it. Jake was lucky to be alive, though he didn't feel very lucky at the moment. The aliens taking care of him looked almost human, except their skin had a slight blue tint and their eyes were way too big. They moved around his bed, checking strange devices and speaking in voices that sounded like they were singing. "Your internal injuries are healing nicely," said one of them, a female who seemed to be his main doctor. "However, your financial records show you have only 12 credits remaining. This is quite pathetic for someone your age." Jake blinked. Did she just call him pathetic? To his face, another alien, younger looking, was changing his bandages. "I must say, your face is rather odd looking compared to our males. The asymmetry is quite disturbing." "Thanks," Jake muttered, not sure if he should be offended or amused, but it got stranger. Throughout the day, these aliens, who called themselves Viridians, kept saying things that would get you punched back home. They talked about his medical condition in detail, mentioned his lack of money constantly, and even debated whether humans were actually intelligent or just good at pretending. The weird part was, they didn't seem mean about it. They said everything with the same matter-of-fact tone you'd use to comment on the weather. After 3 days of this brutal honesty, Jake started to catch on. These aliens couldn't lie. Not wouldn't, couldn't. When he tested it by asking leading questions, they always gave him straight answers, even when those answers made them look bad. "Do you think I'm annoying?" Jake asked his young nurse, whose name tag read 07. "Extremely," she replied without hesitation. "But also fascinating. Humans are very rare here." The Planetary Research Council pays significant credits for information about human culture and behavior. Jake's ears perked up. Credits meant money, and money meant opportunity. "How significant are we talking?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The last cultural consultant earned 50,000 credits for a single report about his home world, 07 said. Of course, that was a Blorthian, and they have 3 heads, so their perspective was quite valuable. 50,000 credits? Jake's mind started racing. Back home, he made a living convincing people to invest in fake businesses, selling worthless insurance policies, and running small-time romance scams. But this was different. These aliens would believe anything he told them because they had no concept of lies. When Dr. Keth9, the head researcher, visited him the next day, Jake was ready. "I've been thinking," Jake said, sitting up straighter in his hospital bed. "Maybe I could help your research. I know quite a bit about Earth culture." Dr. Keth9's big eyes lit up. "This would be wonderful. We know so little about human civilization. Please, tell me about your governmental systems." Jake took a deep breath. "Well, on Earth, we have a very advanced form of democracy. Every major decision is made by consulting our dolphins. Dolphins, yes, they're sea creatures, but also our wisest advisors. They have telepathic abilities and can predict the future. No important law gets passed without dolphin approval." Dr. Keth9 was frantically taking notes. Fascinating. "And how do you communicate with these dolphin advisors?" "Through special underwater meditation chambers. Every human leader has to spend at least 6 hours a day underwater, learning wisdom from the dolphins." It was completely ridiculous, but Dr. Keth9 was eating it up. Jake spent the next hour spinning an elaborate tale about Earth's Dolphin Council and their mystical guidance of human affairs. By the end, he had a contract for 5,000 credits and a request for more information about human aquatic governance systems. As Dr. Keth9 left, practically bouncing with excitement, Jake felt that familiar rush he got from a successful con. Except this was easier than anything he'd ever done. These aliens were like children. They believed everything. A few days later, Jake was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health and his first payment. 5,000 Viridian credits turned out to be enough to rent a nice apartment in the city center. For 6 months, the Viridians had also arranged for him to meet with various research groups who wanted to learn about human culture. But it wasn't just the money that caught Jake's attention. It was Lyra-3. She worked as an artist in the city's cultural district, creating these amazing sculptures that seemed to change color based on your mood. Unlike other Viridians who spoke like they were reading from medical textbooks, Lyra had a warmth to her voice, a way of expressing emotions that felt almost human. "I find your human perspective very intriguing," she told him during their first meeting at a cafe. "The way you describe Earth's artistic traditions is unlike anything in our databases." Jake had been making up Earth artistic traditions on the spot, describing elaborate festivals where humans supposedly painted themselves in mud and danced for 3 days straight. But seeing how interested Lyra was, he found himself wanting to impress her even more. "On Earth, we believe that art should touch the soul," he said, looking into her large, beautiful eyes. "Every human learns to express their deepest emotions through creative work. It's how we find our life partners." "Life partners?" Lyra leaned forward, genuinely curious. "Our romantic connections. We don't just pick someone based on logic like Viridians do. Humans bond through shared artistic expression and emotional connection." This was complete nonsense, of course. Jake's longest relationship back on Earth had lasted 3 months, and it ended when she found out he'd been selling her grandmother's jewelry. But Lyra didn't know that. "This is beautiful," Lyra said softly. "I would very much like to learn more about human bonding customs." As weeks passed, Jake settled into his new life. He rented a luxury apartment that overlooked the city's crystal gardens. He bought expensive clothes and ate at the finest restaurants. The research council kept paying him for increasingly elaborate stories about Earth culture. He told them about humans' ability to see in 12 different color spectrums, about Earth's floating cities that move with the weather, and about the great human tradition of building houses entirely out of music. Each story was more outrageous than the last, but the Viridians accepted everything as fact. The best part was his growing relationship with Lyra. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, completely honest about her feelings, genuinely interested in what he had to say, and beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten every time she smiled. "I think I am developing strong affection for you," she told him one evening as they walked through a park filled with singing flowers. "Is this how human bonding begins?" "Exactly," Jake said, taking her hand. "This is very normal human behavior." For the first time in his life, Jake felt like he might be falling in love. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was having the most honest emotional experience of his life, while living the biggest lie he'd ever told. But late at night, alone in his fancy apartment, Jake sometimes felt a strange uneasiness. The Viridians trusted him completely. They were reorganizing their understanding of the universe based on his made-up stories. Research teams were wasting time and resources trying to replicate impossible human technologies he'd invented still. When morning came and he saw his bank account growing and received another loving message from Lyra, those doubts faded away. He was living better than ever before, surrounded by people who valued him, with a woman who cared about him. What could go wrong? As Jake prepared for sleep in his comfortable bed, looking out at the alien city that had become his home, he had no idea that his perfect new life was about to become much more complicated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, bigger lies, and the first hints that maybe, just maybe, he was getting in over his head. But for tonight, Jake Riley was exactly where he wanted to be, on top of the world. Or at least on top of the strange alien planet where nobody could call him a liar. 6 months had passed since Jake Riley started his new life on this strange planet, and things couldn't be going better, at least. That's what he told himself every morning as he looked out from his penthouse apartment at the crystal towers of the Viridian city below. His lies had grown bigger and bolder with each passing day. What started as simple stories about dolphins giving advice had turned into an entire mythology about Earth that would make science fiction writers jealous. "So you're telling me that humans can actually bend gravity?" asked Professor Veltwelf, the head of Viridian Physics Research, scribbling notes frantically. Jake nodded seriously. Sitting in his plush office at what was now called Riley's Human Cultural Institute, the office walls were covered with fake diplomas and made-up awards he'd created to look more impressive. "Oh yes, it's quite common," Jake said, leaning back in his expensive chair. "Every human city has gravity manipulators. We use them to build our famous upside-down skyscrapers and floating gardens. It's basic human architecture." Professor Veltwell's eyes went wide. "Could you teach us this technology?" "I'm afraid it requires a special human brain structure," Jake replied smoothly. "But I'd be happy to consult on theoretical applications. My usual rate is 10,000 credits per session." As the professor hurried away with his impossible homework, Jake smiled. He'd learned that the bigger and more outrageous his lies were, the more the Viridians paid him. They had no way to doubt anything he said. His business was booming. The Cultural Institute now employed 12 Viridians, who spent their days researching Jake's made-up human customs and technologies. He sold authentic human artifacts, really just regular Viridian items he'd modified with strange decorations. Rich Viridians paid huge sums for human wisdom consultations, where Jake would give them life advice based on completely fictional Earth philosophies. The best part was his book deal. The Mysterious Ways of Earth was set to be published next month, and the advance alone was enough to buy a small spaceship. Jake had filled 300 pages with the most creative lies he'd ever told, describing everything from human time travel methods to the secret language humans spoke with their pet rocks. But his success in business wasn't the only thing making him happy. His relationship with Lyra III had grown deeper and more complicated. She spent most evenings at his apartment now, fascinated by his stories about human romance and culture. "Tell me again about the human bonding ceremony," she said one night, curled up next to him on his couch as they watched the sunset through his floor-to-ceiling windows. Jake had invented this particular tradition months ago, but he'd added new details each time she asked. "Well, humans spend 7 days in complete silence together, communicating only through art and music. It's how we discover if our souls are truly compatible." Lyra's eyes sparkled. "It sounds so beautiful. I've been working on a sculpture series inspired by your descriptions. Perhaps we could try a modified version?" Jake felt a strange flutter in his chest. The way she looked at him, with such trust and genuine affection, sometimes made him forget that everything between them was built on lies. "I like that," he said, and surprisingly, he meant it. But Lyra wasn't the only Viridian woman in his life anymore. 3 months ago, he met Tara 5, a security officer assigned to protect important cultural consultants like himself. Tara was completely different from Lyra, stronger, more direct, with an intensity that both excited and scared Jake. "Your human combat techniques are fascinating," Tara said during one of their training sessions. Jake had convinced her that all humans were trained in something he called stealth fighting, really just a combination of movie fight scenes and video game moves he remembered. "On Earth, we believe physical and mental strength must be balanced," Jake explained, trying not to stare as Tara easily lifted weights that would crush him. "That's why human warriors also study poetry and music. I would like to learn human poetry," Tara said, her large eyes fixed on his. "Perhaps you could teach me privately." Jake's heart raced, but not just from attraction. Having two Viridian women interested in him was flattering, but it was also dangerous. Both Lyra and Tara were completely honest about their feelings, which meant he had to be very careful about what he said to each of them. He'd started telling different lies to manage both relationships. He told Lyra that human bonding was a slow, artistic process that required months of careful emotional preparation. He told Tara that human warriors traditionally took time to evaluate combat compatibility before choosing life partners. Both women accepted these explanations without question. The lies were getting complicated, though. Jake had started keeping detailed notes in a locked file on his computer, tracking what he'd told to whom. Sometimes he'd catch himself mid-sentence, trying to remember if he'd told a particular story to Lyra or Tara or one of his business clients. Dr. Keth 9, his original contact at the research center, had become especially demanding. The elderly, Viridian scientists wanted increasingly detailed information about Earth's most advanced technologies. You mentioned that humans have mastered time travel, Dr. Keth 9 said during their weekly meeting. Could you explain how this relates to your Dolphin Advisory System? Jake's mind raced. Had he really said humans could time travel? He must have, because he never forgot a lie once he'd told it. Well, you see, the dolphins exist outside normal time, he said. Improvising desperately, they can swim through different time periods, which is why their advice is so valuable. They've already seen the future. Remarkable. And how do dolphins survive in different time periods? They have special time-resistant biology, Jake said, making it up as he went along. All Earth's sea creatures do, actually. That's why we build our cities underwater originally, before we learned to manipulate gravity. Dr. Keth 9 was writing furiously, but Jake could see confusion in the old scientist's eyes. For the first time, someone seemed to be having trouble following his stories. That night, alone in his apartment, Jake stared at his computer screen, looking at the growing file of lies he'd told. The document was over 50 pages long now, and some of the stories were starting to contradict each other. He claimed humans were both underwater dwellers and gravity manipulators, both telepathic and dependent on dolphin advisors, both peaceful artists and trained warriors, for the first time since arriving on this planet. Jake felt a twinge of real worry. What happened when the lies got so big that even trusting aliens started to see the contradictions? He pushed the thought away and went to bed. Tomorrow he had 3 consultation meetings, a book signing event, and dinner with Lyra. His life was perfect, and he wasn't going to let a little paranoia ruin it. But as he fell asleep, Jake didn't know that across the city, a Viridian specialist in logical analysis had just been assigned to review all available information about human culture. Someone whose job was specifically defining consistencies in complex data sets. Jake's perfect world was about to get much more complicated. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning while Jake was having breakfast and reading glowing reviews of his book. The Mysterious Ways of Earth had become the best-selling cultural study in Viridian history, and Jake was feeling pretty good about himself. Then his assistant, a nervous young Viridian named Blix4, rushed into his office with a worried expression. "Mr. Riley, there's someone here to see you," Blix4 said, wringing his hands. "He says he's from the Planetary Truth Analysis Department." Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "The what department?" "It's a new government division," Blix4 explained. "They specialize in finding logical errors in important information systems. The visitor's name is Axiom 1, and he's considered one of our greatest philosophical minds." Jake's blood ran cold, but he forced himself to smile. "Send him in. I'm always happy to meet fellow intellectuals." Axiom 1 turned out to be an older Viridian with silver-tinted skin and eyes that seemed to look right through you. Unlike other Viridians who were easily impressed by Jake's confident manner, this one studied him with the intensity of a scientist, examining a bug under a microscope. "Mr. Riley," Axiom 1 said, settling into the chair across from Jake's desk. "I've been reviewing your cultural reports with great interest. However, I've noticed some puzzling elements in your descriptions of Earth." "Oh," Jake tried to keep his voice steady. "What kind of puzzling elements?" Axiom 1 pulled out a thick folder. "Well, for instance, you stated that humans are both aquatic creatures who live underwater and land-based beings who build floating cities. You've described Earth as having both 12-hour days and 36-hour days. You've claimed humans communicate telepathically, but also require dolphin advisors for guidance." Jake's mouth went dry, but his con artist instincts kicked in. I can see how that might seem confusing to a Viridian mind," he said, leaning forward with fake confidence. "You have to understand that human civilization is incredibly diverse. Different regions of Earth develop completely different cultures." "I see," Axiom 1 made a note. "And these different regions exist in the same physical reality?" "Of course," Jake said, though he was sweating now. Earth is a very large planet with many environments, yet according to universal physics, a planet cannot simultaneously have different day lengths or gravitational properties in different regions. These would be fundamental planetary characteristics. Jake felt like he was drowning, but he kept talking. Human science is more advanced than Viridian science in some areas. We've learned to modify local physics in different zones, Axiom 1's large eyes narrowed slightly. Modify local physics, yes. Through our quantum consciousness technology, Jake said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Humans exist in multiple realities simultaneously, which allows us to experience different physical laws at the same time. Even as he said it, Jake knew how crazy it sounded, but Axiom 1 just wrote more notes. Fascinating. The philosopher said, I would very much like to study this quantum consciousness phenomenon. Perhaps we could schedule regular meetings. After Axiom 1 left, Jake sat in his office staring at the wall for a long time. He just told the most ridiculous lie of his entire career, claiming humans could exist in multiple realities at once. It was completely insane, but somehow he convinced himself it might work. That evening, things got worse. Lyra 3 came to his apartment with a large wrapped package and an expression of pure joy. I have a surprise for you, she said, practically, bouncing with excitement. I've finished my sculpture series about human bonding customs, and I've created something special for our own ceremony. She unwrapped what looked like a complex crystal formation designed to change colors based on emotional resonance, exactly the kind of advanced art that made Viridian culture so beautiful. It's designed to facilitate the 7-day silence bonding you described, Lyra explained. I've studied all your teachings about human romantic connection, and I'm ready to begin our official pairing ceremony. Jake stared at the sculpture, feeling sick. Lyra had spent months creating this based on his lies about human customs that didn't exist. She'd arranged time off from work, prepared special foods, and even invited her family to witness the ceremony. Lyra, this is beautiful, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But maybe we should wait a bit longer. Make sure we're ready. Her face fell. Have I misunderstood something about human bonding? I thought you said I was progressing well in learning your customs. You are. You're perfect, Jake said quickly. It's just complicated. That night, as Lyra slept beside him, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time since coming to this planet, he was facing emotions he didn't know how to handle. Guilt, real guilt, not the mild annoyance he used to feel after pulling small cons back on Earth. Lyra loved him, really loved him, based on a completely false understanding of who he was and what humans were like. Tara was falling for him too, making life decisions based on his made-up stories about human warrior culture. The worst part was that Jake was starting to love them back, both of them, in different ways. Lyra's artistic soul and gentle nature made him feel peaceful in a way he'd never experienced. Tara's strength and directness challenged him to be better than he was. But how could any of it be real when it was all built on lies? 3 days later, his worst fears were confirmed. Blixford burst into his office again, this time looking terrified. Mr. Riley, Axiom 1 has scheduled a presentation to the entire Planetary Council. Blixford stammered. The title is Logical Inconsistencies in Human Cultural Data, a Comprehensive Analysis. It's set for next week. Jake felt his perfect world crumbling around him. Axiom 1 was going to expose every lie he'd told, in front of the most powerful Viridians on the planet. There would be no talking his way out of that, but it got worse. That same afternoon, Tara 5 came to his office, not for their usual training session, but wearing her official security uniform. Jake, I need to ask you some questions about your Cultural Institute's finances, she said, and her tone was all business. There are some irregularities in the fund transfers that I need to investigate. Jake's heart sank even further in his desperation to maintain his lifestyle and prepare for a possible quick escape. He'd been slowly moving money from the Institute's research accounts into his personal funds. He told himself it was just a loan, that he'd pay it back once his book royalties came in. But Tara was too good at her job. she'd noticed the missing money. "I'm sure it's just a bookkeeping error," Jake said, trying to sound casual while his mind raced for an explanation. "I hope so," Tara said, her large eyes sad. "I would hate to discover that someone I care about was involved in financial deception, especially someone who has taught me so much about honor and trust after she left." Jake slumped in his chair, overwhelmed by the irony. The woman he was falling for was investigating him for crimes he'd actually committed, while believing he was an expert in honor and trust. He had 1 week before Axiom 1's presentation would destroy his reputation forever. Tara was closing in on his embezzlement, and Lyra was waiting for him to participate in a bonding ceremony based on completely fake traditions. For the first time in his life, Jake Riley was completely out of ideas. The lies had gotten so big and complicated that even he couldn't keep track of them anymore. Every solution he could think of required telling even bigger lies, and he was starting to realize that path could only lead to disaster. As he sat in his expensive office, looking out at the alien city that had become his home, Jake faced a truth more uncomfortable than any he'd ever encountered. He was going to have to decide what kind of person he really wanted to be. The choice was coming fast, and there was nowhere left to run. Jake Riley had never been one to give up without a fight. Sitting in his apartment at 3 in the morning, surrounded by financial documents and fake cultural reports, he was planning the biggest gamble of his life. He had for days before Axiom 1's presentation would expose him to the entire planetary council. Terra 5 was getting closer to discovering his missing funds every day, and Lyra 3 was still waiting for their bonding ceremony, trusting him completely while he fell apart inside. The smart thing would be to run. Jake had enough credits saved to buy passage on the next transport ship leaving the planet. He could disappear into the galaxy and start fresh somewhere else, just like he'd done on Earth when things got too hot. But something had changed. Maybe it was the way Lyra smiled when she talked about their future together. Maybe it was how Tara looked at him with such respect when she thought he was teaching her about honor. Or maybe it was just that, for the first time in his life, Jake had found a place where people actually valued him. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving, which meant he had to find another way out. That's when Jake came up with his most desperate plan yet. If he was going down, he'd take enough money with him to at least have options. The Cultural Institute had received a massive grant from the government to fund research into human technology. Jake had access to all of it as the director. If he could transfer those funds to an off-world account, he'd have enough credits to disappear anywhere in the galaxy. The next morning, Jake walked into his office with a fake smile and a stomach full of acid. Blix 4, he called to his assistant. "I need you to prepare emergency fund transfer authorizations. All of them, sir?" Blix 4 looked confused. "That's the entire research budget for the next 3 years. "Yes, I just received urgent communication from Earth," Jake said, the lies flowing easier than ever. "There's a crisis situation developing, and the Human Cultural Council needs immediate financial support. It's part of our emergency protocols." Blix 4, like every other Viridian, accepted this explanation without question. Within hours, Jake had authorization to transfer almost 200,000 credits to what he claimed was an Earth Emergency Response Fund, but was actually an anonymous account he'd set up months ago as insurance. As the money moved through various financial networks, Jake felt the familiar rush of pulling off a successful con. But this time, it was mixed with something else. Sick feeling in his stomach that grew stronger every minute. These weren't random strangers he was stealing from. These were people who trusted him, who had welcomed him into their society, who had given him opportunities he'd never dreamed of back on Earth. That evening, Terra 5 came to his apartment, but not for their usual dinner date. She was in full security uniform, her expression serious and professional. "Jake, I need to talk to you about the Institute's finances," she said, sitting across from him in his living room. "There are major discrepancies in today's transactions." Jake's mouth went dry. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Nearly 200,000 credits were transferred to an off-world account this afternoon," Terra said, watching his face carefully. "The authorization came from your office." but the destination account doesn't match any known Earth government facilities. Jake's mind raced. Tara was too smart and too good at her job. She figured out what he'd done in less than a day. I can explain that, Jake said, forcing himself to stay calm. It's complicated human diplomatic procedure. Sometimes we have to route funds through neutral accounts for security reasons. Tara's large eyes studied his face with an intensity that made Jake want to look away. Jake, I've been investigating financial crimes for 8 years. I know what stolen money looks like when it's being moved through shell accounts. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jake realized that Tara wasn't just investigating a crime anymore. She was trying to figure out how the person she cared about could be involved in something like this. I don't understand, Tara said finally, her voice softer but more confused. You've taught me about human values like honesty and honor. Why would someone who understands these principles engage in financial deception? Jake felt like someone was squeezing his heart. Tara was trying to make sense of his behavior using the fake moral system he taught her. She couldn't understand how her teacher of honor could be a thief because she had no concept that people could lie about their values. Maybe you don't understand humans as well as you think, Jake said quietly. Before Tara could respond, Jake's door chimed. Lyra 3 walked in carrying a small bag, her face glowing with excitement. Jake, I hope you don't mind that I used my entry code, she said. Then stopped when she saw Tara's official uniform. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I interrupting something important? Tara was just leaving, Jake said quickly, but Tara remained seated. Actually, I think Lyra 3 should hear this too. Tara said, Jake, I need you to explain where those credits really went, and I need the truth. The word truth hit Jake like a physical blow. Here were the two women he'd come to love, both asking him for the one thing he'd never given anyone in his entire life. Lyra looked between them, confusion growing on her face. What's happening? Jake, what credits are you discussing? Lyra, Tara said gently, I believe Jake may have taken money from the Cultural Institute illegally. That's impossible, Lyra said immediately. Jake teaches about human integrity and honor. He would never engage in deceptive behavior. Jake watched the two women he cared about most trying to make sense of something that challenged everything they believed about him. Tara was struggling with the evidence of his crime, while Lyra was struggling with the very concept that someone could act against their stated values. Look, Jake said, standing up abruptly, maybe I should just go. This is getting too complicated. Go where? Lyra asked, real fear creeping into her voice. Away from here. Off the planet. Maybe it's time I went back to Earth. But what about our bonding ceremony? Lyra's voice was small and hurt. What about everything you've taught me? About human love and commitment? Jake looked at her face, so full of trust and affection, and something inside him finally broke. Lyra, he said, his voice cracking. What if I told you that everything you know about human love and commitment came from someone who's never experienced either one? Neither woman understood what he meant, but they could hear the pain in his voice. Jake, Tara said, standing up and moving toward him. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out together. Just tell us the truth. That word again, truth. Jake looked at Tara, who still believed he was an honorable teacher despite the evidence of his crimes. He looked at Lyra, who had built her entire understanding of love around his lies. He thought about Axiom 1's presentation in 3 days, which would expose every false thing he'd ever said about human culture. And for the first time in his life, Jake Riley considered telling the truth. The truth, he said slowly, is that I'm not the person either of you think I am. The next 3 days were the longest of Jake Riley's life. After Tara and Lyra left his apartment that night, Tara to continue her investigation. Lyra to process what Jake had said about not being who she thought he was. Jake sat alone with his thoughts and a decision that terrified him. He could still run. The stolen credits were safely transferred, and he had enough time to catch a transport off-world before Axiom 1's presentation. But every time he started packing, he'd remember Lyra's confused expression or Tara's disappointed eyes, and he'd stop. On the morning of Axiom 1's presentation to the Planetary Council, Jake made a choice that surprised even him. Instead of fleeing, he walked into the council chambers. The room was packed with every important Viridian scientist, philosopher, and government official on the planet. Jake could see Dr. Keth 9 in the front row, looking nervous. BLIX4 was there too, probably wondering if he was about to lose his job. Terra 5 sat in the security section, her face unreadable. And Lyra 3 was in the cultural observers area, still hoping that somehow this would all make sense. Axiom 1 stood at the center of the room with a massive display screen behind him, ready to systematically destroy Jake's entire fictional universe. Esteemed council members, Axiom 1 began. Today I present my analysis of the logical inconsistencies in our collected data about human civilization for the next hour. Jake watched his carefully constructed lies fall apart piece by piece. Axiom 1 showed how human day length couldn't vary by region, how underwater cities couldn't coexist with gravity manipulation technology, how telepathic abilities would eliminate the need for dolphin advisors. The conclusion is inescapable. Axiom 1 said as his presentation neared its end, either human civilization defies fundamental laws of physics and logic, or our information sources are somehow unreliable. Jake noticed that Axiom 1 still wasn't directly accusing him of lying. The concept was so foreign to Viridian minds that even their greatest philosopher couldn't quite grasp it. That's when Jake stood up. Council members, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. I have something to say. Axiom 1 paused, surprised. Mr. Riley, would you like to clarify some of these inconsistencies? Jake walked to the center of the room, feeling hundreds of large alien eyes focused on him. His heart was pounding. But for the first time in months, he felt strangely calm. I want to clarify everything, Jake said. Every single thing I've told you about human culture and civilization has been a lie. The silence that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was as if the entire room had stopped breathing. I don't understand, said the council leader, her voice shaking slightly. You're saying your information was incorrect? No, Jake said clearly. I'm saying I deliberately told you things that weren't true. I made up stories about Earth, about humans, about everything. None of it was real. The reaction was immediate and frightening. Several Viridians collapsed in their seats, holding their heads as if in physical pain. Others began making distress sounds that Jake had never heard before. A few had to be helped from the room by medical staff. This is impossible. Dr. Keth 9 gasped from the front row. Information cannot be intentionally false. That would mean I'm a liar. Jake said, using a word that didn't even exist in the Viridian language. It means I told you things I knew weren't true because I wanted your money and your respect. Terra 5 was staring at him with an expression of complete shock. Lyra 3 had tears streaming down her face, though Jake wasn't sure if she was crying from sadness or from the psychological shock of understanding deception for the first time. But why? The council leader asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you communicate false information deliberately? Jake took a deep breath. This was the hardest part, because on Earth, where I come from, people lie all the time. We deceive each other for money, for power, for love, for convenience. I'm what my people would call a con artist, someone who makes a living by tricking others. The room erupted in confused voices and distressed sounds as the Viridians tried to process this concept that challenged their entire understanding of communication and society. Order, the council leader called, though she looked shaken herself. Mr. Riley, you are describing behavior that our minds struggle to comprehend. Are you saying that members of your species regularly communicate information they know to be false? Yes, Jake said simply. And I'm saying I did it to all of you because I thought you were naive and easy to take advantage of. Lyra 3 stood up suddenly, her voice breaking as she spoke. But you said you loved me. You taught me about human bonding and commitment. Was that also false information? Jake looked at her, this beautiful, trusting creature who had given him her heart based on his lies. The things I told you about human customs were lies, he said. But my feelings for you, those became real. How can feelings be real if they're built on false information? Lyra asked, genuinely confused. It was a good question, and Jake didn't have a good answer. Over the next several hours, Jake found himself in the strangest situation of his life, being interrogated about the concept of lying by beings who had never encountered deliberate deception. Is it painful to communicate false information? Asked one council member. Do all humans possess this ability? Asked another. How do you determine what is true if your species regularly shares false information? Jake answered every question as honestly as he could, explaining concepts like trust, doubt, verification, and skepticism to minds that had never needed these tools. The hardest part was when they asked about his relationships with Lyra and Tara. I told each of them different lies about human customs, Jake admitted. I made Lyra believe that humans bond slowly through artistic connection. I made Tara believe that humans test compatibility through warrior training. Neither story was true. But you stated that your feelings became genuine, Axiom once said, taking notes frantically. How is authentic emotion possible in the presence of deliberately false communication? I don't know, Jake said. I guess that's part of being human. We're complicated and contradictory. We can love people while lying to them. We can feel guilty about things we keep doing anyway. We can want to be better than we are while still making terrible choices. As the interrogation continued, Jake realized something strange was happening. Instead of becoming angry or demanding punishment, the Viridians were becoming fascinated by the concept of deception. They began asking theoretical questions about how lies worked, how they could protect themselves from future deception, and what this meant for their understanding of other species. This presents a significant problem, the council leader said finally. If other species possess this ability to deliberately communicate false information, our society is vulnerable in ways we never imagined. You need to learn how to doubt, Jake said, how to question information, especially from outsiders, how to verify claims before accepting them as truth. And that's how Jake Riley, professional liar and con artist, became the first teacher of skepticism in Viridian history. The council decided that rather than punishing Jake, they would keep him on Viridian Prime as a deception studies consultant. His job would be to help their society understand and defend against the concept of lies. It wasn't the ending Jake had expected, but it felt right somehow. His relationship with Lyra took months to rebuild. She had to learn the difference between the lies he told about human culture and the genuine feelings he developed for her. It was painful and complicated, but eventually, they found a new kind of connection based on truth instead of fantasy. Tara became his professional partner, working with him to develop security protocols to protect Viridians from future deception. Their relationship evolved to build on mutual respect and honesty about their feelings and limitations. Jake returned all the money he'd stolen and wrote a new book, this time about the dangers of deception and the importance of truth. It became required reading in Viridian schools. Sometimes, late at night, Jake would look out at the alien city that had become his real home and think about the strange journey that brought him here. He'd come to this planet as a liar looking for easy marks and somehow become a teacher of truth. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was better than any life he'd ever imagined. And for the first time in his existence, Jake Riley was exactly who he appeared to be: a flawed, honest, and finally at peace with both.